Hi, my name is Katie Stewart, and today I'm going to be talking about amphetamine, specifically methamphetamine, and its sort of reinforcing effects in the body, or like why it's reinforcing. Just quick side note, my desk is very messy. I'm sorry, it's exam week. Also, there's like drilling going on outside and stuff, but yeah. So before I get into the exact mechanisms, just sort of what methamphetamine is. It's an illicit drug that you've probably heard of as either meth or crystal meth, and it typically has long-lasting effects in the body. So compared to amphetamine, methamphetamine's effects do last longer, and I'll kind of go into that later. You'll see that when I draw it out. So the reinforcing effects are due to the activity on the dopamine system, and basically what methamphetamine does is it increases dopamine at the synapses. And yeah, I'm just going to sort of draw it out so you can sort of see what I'm talking about. And yeah. Okay, so I'm just going to get started by drawing a synapse. Hopefully you can see this in the camera. All right, here's my presynaptic. Postsynaptic. I'm also left-handed, so I'm sorry that I'm going to be putting my hand in the picture a lot and it might smudge at some points. Anyway, so this is the synaptic cleft. Here we have our vesicles. These vesicles here contain dopamine, which I'm going to mark in green. And what normally happens is you have an excitatory signal, which comes down the axon to the terminal. And these things will get released into the synapse, like so. See, I already smudged, I'm so sorry. And on the postsynaptic cell, we've just got some receptors, some D1 and D2 receptors. And what happens is we also have dopamine in the cleft after it is released from the synapse. From the presynaptic neuron. The last thing that we have on here is we've got these dopamine transporters. I'm just gonna make one. Maybe I'll make one here. And these dopamine transporters, they take up dopamine when it's in the synaptic cleft to repackage them into the vesicles. So usually what happens is after there's a lot of dopamine here, it's binding to your receptors, your dopamine will go and come back in and then obviously get repackaged into the vesicles. However, methamphetamine, which actually I am going to write dopamine at the top just so that you know it's in green. And I'm going to write methamphetamine in red. We'll do red today. Okay. So, with methamphetamine present in the body, okay, methamphetamine is present. What happens is it gives this increased competition with the dopamine to get reuptaken by the dopamine transporters. And usually it is methamphetamine that's taken up. And because of that, there is no dopamine coming in or being reuptaken by these transporters, meaning that the dopamine is staying in the synaptic cleft for a longer period of time, binding to these D1 and D2 receptors, and therefore initiating that reward pathway, the euphoria. Yeah. So what also happens is after, let's say, methamphetamine is taken up, okay, I'm going to draw, okay, this is a vesicle. It's really big, and I know that's like not accurately correct at all, but it's just sort of to show you what's inside the vesicle. So here we have our VMAT2, our vesicular monoamine transporter 2, and we also have, let's say, like our proton pump, which is, I think, pumps 2 protons in. Ooh, I'm not actually positive about that. Maybe I won't write that just in case. But it takes ATP in the process, and you've got protons in, and you've got dopamine in, usually. But what happens, actually, I'm not even going to write that. What happens is your methamphetamine is taken up by the dopamine transporters. Your dopamine in the synaptic cleft is staying there for longer, binding longer to these D1 and D2 receptors, prolonging the reward and euphoric effects. And your methamphetamine comes into the cell, and it actually gets transported into the vesicle. And so it throws off the whole pH gradient. So here's pH, and it throws it off. So what happens when that starts happening is your dopamine is then brought out into the presynaptic terminal. And with excess dopamine in the presynaptic terminal, these dopamine transporters start working in the opposite way and start pumping dopamine out. So you have excess dopamine now in the synapse, and it's not being taken up by your dopamine transporters, again, meaning longer binding to these receptors, increased reward, increased euphoria. Now, what also is happening, especially with methamphetamine, is you've got monoamine oxidase. I'll draw it right here. Monoamine oxidase. Monoamine oxidase works sort of as a secondary mechanism to take up dopamine. And what it does is it breaks down dopamine at the synaptic cleft. And usually this system comes into play when your dopamine transporters are either overwhelmed or they're not working correctly. And this is when the system becomes really like apparent. However, we've got our methamphetamine, and methamphetamine actually inhibits this and it blocks this action. So you now have no reuptake of dopamine into the dopamine transporters back into the presynaptic terminal. And at the same time, you have no monoamine oxidase that is further breaking down this dopamine. So this dopamine is just staying in the synaptic cleft and building up there, which again, increases reward, increases euphoria. Now, the last thing I'm pretty sure that methamphetamine works on is eventually what happens is, so the amount of dopamine transporters that are on the synaptic cleft, what happens is they begin to sort of detach completely, and you have less dopamine transporters on your active zone, on your presynaptic neuron. So let's say this one, we get rid of this one completely, and then that will also decrease the uptake of dopamine at the synapses, again, increasing reward, increasing euphoria. And I think that's pretty much all for this system. So thank you.